Tyne, thank you so much for taking some time out to see me today, because I know that you're going to really fill me up with lots of knowledge about somebody who I really want to know more about, who is nellgwynn. I've been to see a few other people about it, and I really just feel that you'll be able to help me with the colour and what it was like in those times, and what it was like to be someone like her who I established, came from a pretty bad home upbringing and, pretty lowly, not much money. What was it like, Tyne?
Well, it was an extraordinary time of change, the Restoration, and even the clue is restoration. We'd had Cromwell, who had run a Puritan military dictatorship, outlawing fun, beauty, no dancing, no theatre, no singing, even privately in your home. Certainly no glamour, but no colour. You had to wear a uniform. Everyone was forced into a uniform. Times were very drab. No alcohol. You couldn't go to your local inn. Couldn't even put makeup on. A woman or man wearing makeup would be put in the stocks, and that would inevitably lead to death, because you were so vulnerable. You would be beaten and flogged and, well, even worse.
So the Restoration was a time where everything changed?
Completely. When Cromwell died, there was wide-scale rioting in the streets, and Puritans were dragged out of their beds, hung in the streets by ordinary people, and those that could fled to other parts of Europe or America from their war crimes. And when Charles was invited back and signed the Treaty of Breda, he came back with 20,000 fellow royalists, and then they rode through the streets. You can't imagine the joy in the heart of the average Englishman and woman who came out on all the rooftops of London. It took him 8 hours to travel 2 miles, the cavalcade, as they rode in their carriages, and people called out their names from everyone they recognised, the celebrities particularly. And the fountains ran with champagne across London, and people were free to drink, dance, sing. They brought out all their brightest clothes that they'd hidden during Cromwell's Puritan military dictatorship. They were delighted, and that festive feel did not abate for at least 10 years.
That's fantastic. So someone like nellgwynn, obviously not much money. I think
she was 10 years of age when he came back, and it was a turning point in her life, because she was one of those young women who stood looking out and recognised that this perhaps offered an opportunity from the misery and degradation of her life, the darkness of living in absolute squalor.
So we think she's somebody who clocked this, who wanted to think, actually this man is changing everything for the better.
She was besotted with him.
Already?
From the moment she saw him, she was completely, like most women, she thought, he's a god. He is the chance of my salvation.
And how did she do it? How did she get to go to where she was, becoming a celebrity?
Well, pretty easily, really, because she was fortunate enough to, her first turns on the stage weren't terribly successful.
And how old was she?
Well, she was on 14 when she first appeared on the stage, but she really didn't take off until the end of the 1660s, when she was cast in comedies by the great wit Aphra, herself a massive celebrity of the era. And she recognised in Nell that she had a natural wit and a wonderful way of dealing with the crowds and the hecklers. And
how does someone like Nell kind of get that job? Were there sort of impresarios or were there agents in those days?
Well, there were, in fact, Killigrew theatre owners always had their eyes open, and there was a lot of, like Killigrew was a great example. Not only were they owners of theatres and write the occasional plays, but they also spied for the king, and they kept an eye on, took the temperature. They were in a unique position to take the temperature of the crowds on what they thought and felt about the king and the monarchy. So they had close relationships, and also remember there were masques held at court, and that they were more licentious, more bawdy,
Yes.
And Nell was introduced to the king initially by Aphra, who later became her lesbian lover.
Okay.
And she was given a role in a masque. Masks were exactly like plays, maybe with a bit of singing thrown in, and certainly fashion came from the stage.
And they were performed in theatres as well, not in...
They were performed in the palace,
in the palace,
or
okay.
Whitehall, yes, and the stage design was sumptuous, the costumes were sumptuous. Nell would never have come across, had the opportunity to feel these fabrics. Shops were popping up everywhere. Fashion was now an industry. We had the biggest fabric counterfeiting industry in the world. We were making a lot of money from counterfeiting Indian fabrics.
Okay.
And but she was feeling the real thing.
And how did she meet him? So she met him in one of his masks, and then how did they create that conversation?
He wanted her to be his lover, his
Okay.
mistress, and she said, well, it'll cost you 500 quid.
Really?
He refused to pay. He was pretty penniless. He was completely reliant, really, although it was all quite secretive, but he'd signed a secret treaty with his cousin, the King of France, the Sun King, at Versailles, whom he'd stayed with during his exile, who funded him every year, gave him an annuity, yes. And so he didn't have much money, so it really didn't hurt. Her life didn't take off until Aphra was able to get her into a comedy so she could really shine. She ended up, of course, being paid 5,000 quid a year and set up on Pall-Mall.
How did that happen?
Well, it happened because the king couldn't live without her. She was cheeky, she took no nonsense, she didn't recognise class. Now, all these things, in fact, were very fashionable.
Yes.
It was fashionable to cock a snook at power. It was fashionable to be bawdy. It was fashionable to be outlandish, outrageous, and to dress wildly and speak recklessly. And Nell ticked all those boxes. So she had beauty and cheek.
And cheek, which I love. But he had 13 mistresses altogether. Like,
well, they're the ones that, no, he had many mistresses, but he had regular ones whom he respected enough to fund, to take care of, to acknowledge their children. And Nell, when she first gave birth, she referred to her son, Charles, as our little bastard. Now, this hurt the king, and she, in fact, held him by his ankles outside a window and said, I'll drop him unless you give him a title. So he did.
Wow. So she really did have him over a barrel.
She knew that his children meant a lot to him. Unlike most kings, he was very keen to claim his children.
Can I just stop it just there? That's fascinating, by the way.